not so good fact about some of these technology investments. Supply chain has a shortage of talent. It's hit rate has been 100%.
Wow.
Amazing growth this year.
Welcome to our podcast where we deep dive into the intricacies of the world around us. Think about your daily medicines, fruits, and vegetables, or even bigger products like cars, scooters, apparels, and electronics. The list goes on. Every single item we consume has a fascinating journey behind it. Take a simple tennis ball, which is used at Wimbledon. For instance, it travels over 50,000 miles, crossing 11 countries and 4 continents, getting manufactured in Philippines and finally delivered to England. Now imagine the complex process involved in manufacturing and delivering our life-saving medicines, right? So today we have a special guest who has spent over 2 decades implementing technology to solve supply chain problems. He is the CEO of Smartlinks, a leading Asia Pacific supply chain technology and solutions company. And Smartlinks is also the recipient of Blue Yonder Partner of the Year award. Please welcome Vineet to our show. Hi, Vineet. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Vivek. Thanks for having me as a part of this show, and congratulations to you as well for having more than 1,000 plus subscribers in a very short span of time.
Thank you, Vineet. We are just starting off, and thanks for your time here today. Vineet, before we even get into the questions around SmartLink and a little bit about your background, I wanted you to help us understand what is supply chain in the easiest way possible.
Correct. And that's a good starting point, Vivek. So, all of us, majority, and you did mention scooters and cars in your starting sentences. And let's take an example. In order to purchase a scooter or a car, you go to a showroom. A scooter is typically delivered to you within a week from the time that you book. Sometimes you can get your scooter the next day as well, whereas a car may take a little bit longer. But imagine how does that happen? Because someone is not actually starting to make a scooter when you kind of go ahead and place an order. So someone has already done a lot of thinking so that you get your scooter or car within a very short span of time. So what happens in the process? Let's delve into this process. So there is in any supply chain process, there is actually a demand planner who is figuring out what is the demand, what kind of demand it is, and where that demand lies. So someone is thinking through what kind of car will sell in which part of the country, what is the color, what is the model that will sell. So there is a whole demand planning process that happens, which is essentially a prediction of demand. Now, as he or she is predicting that demand, there is someone who is planning movement of goods from factory to the final point of consumption. In this case, it's the showroom or a yard which is in that particular city. Now, if you go further up in the supply chain or in this whole chain of things, there are people who are planning how these items should be produced. And if you go further up the supply chain, there are people who are planning how the items are to be procured for a manufacture of a car. To give you a sense of complexity with respect to a car manufacturing, as SmartLinks, we have worked quite a bit in the automotive domain. A car takes close to 30,000 parts. And you are assembling a car out of those 30,000 parts. There can be a lower number of sub-assemblies, which can be of the order of 3,000 parts. But that's the size and the scale of problem. Or if I were to say the coordination needed. All these functions have to happen, or all these functions have to be very well coordinated. Imagine it like an orchestra, and car is the symphony that comes out of that orchestra. Even if you're missing a nut, you will not get a car at the end of the process. and imagine it doing it across 30,000 parts.
Mhm.
Now, all these 30,000 parts, you don't get it from one place. And you gave a very good example of the tennis ball. With car, this problem explodes to a next level.
Right.
So a chip may be coming from Taiwan, certain parts may be coming from China, a certain specialized chip may be coming from Japan. The whole supplier footprint is spread across. And as you know, right, it's a more connected world now. A earthquake in Japan can disrupt your whole car manufacturing process. You may not get the right parts at the right time to deliver the car at the showroom at the right time. So this is the complexity we are dealing with. Supply chain is all about creating symphony out of this orchestra.
Now we understand what supply chain is. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how it all started?
Yeah. So I was brought up in Rourkela, a steel city. Um, I did my schooling in Rourkela, and then I did my bachelor's in industrial engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. And I started my journey or my career at Tata Consultancy Services. And the first uh, project that I got was in the supply chain space. It was not by design, though I'm an industrial engineer by training. Uh, it was not that I fully thought through those career moves to say that I would like to do supply chain. But the point is that by coincidence, I got a supply chain project.
Okay.
And that is when I realized that this is my true calling.
Right.
So imagine me like a supply chain engineer who is obsessed with solving supply chain problems using technology.
It's an amazing case, Vineet. I have seldom seen people accidentally finding their true calling. So, in that sense, it's an amazing case.
Correct.
And tell us something about SmartLinks, how it all started.
So I've almost spent 2 decades in the supply chain space. And the first few years with Tata Consultancy Services doing supply chain projects. And then I became part of I2 Technologies, which is now known as Blue Yonder. And I played various functions, or I did various things within Blue Yonder. It is one of the leading provider of supply chain solutions, products and solutions. So first decade of my career, I almost spent on solving supply chain planning problems, and the second decade is something I spent on supply chain execution problems. In Blue Yonder, I played, again from a functional perspective, I would say, 3 roles. One is delivering IT solutions to customer. Second was a business consulting role, which was looking at the problem and looking at the processes and figuring out solutions. So that is where the intersection of technology and the process is what I learned. And the third role that I played at Blue Yonder was the sales role, where I was actively convincing customers of the need of supply chain technology and solutions and selling those solutions to them. So these are the 3 roles that I played. And as I was in the role of a salesperson selling supply chain solution, I realized a very not so good fact about some of these technology investments. So out of 100 technology investments that go into supply chain, 70% of them fail. Only 30% were successful. And it was personally very painful for me to see those failures, the 70% failure.
And why would those 70% fail?
Yeah, so that was the question. That was the quest.
Right.
So what I realized, you need 3 ingredients to make a supply chain technology investment successful? One is the understanding of the domain, which is understanding of the function. What is the right way to do demand planning for, say, automotive? Or what is the right way to do transportation planning for an automotive inbound logistics? So there are a lot of nuances around that. Second is the technology or the product that you're trying to implement. And the third thing is the change management. If you don't get all these three ingredients together, you don't have a successful outcome of that technology investment.
Right.
And you had companies which existed or which had mastered the art of each of these ingredients, but not all together.
So in silos.
In silos.
Right.
So the intersection mattered. So you had companies which were very good at understanding the process. You had companies which were the OEMs or organizations which were building those supply chain products were very good at product. And then which you had companies which were very good at change management. But you did not have a company which could do all these three together.
Right.
That was the hypothesis we started with.
Right.
And then the question is, why does such an organization not exist? So when we started looking at all the big organizations, they had the muscle, they had the capability in some ways to bring out that intersection. But the key aspect that they were missing was focus. And this is what we brought into the game, because we all were supply chain people who were trying to figure out how to solve supply chain problems. So our focus was pretty deep. This is how we started off.
Right. You got a hypothesis. One, how did you validate it? Two, how did you start off? Like, what was the trigger point where you thought that, it's a good time to leave my well-paid job and then go ahead and take a chance?
Correct. I'll answer the second question first.
Yeah, and just to add to this question, sorry I interrupted you, but just to add to this question, what made you think, was it an intuition or was it data driven, that this is the problem I definitely need to solve and I can spend my life solving this problem?
Excellent question. And so once you got the hypothesis in your mind, right, and you start looking for data, and it's not always possible to get data in a very crisp and clear format to drive that clarity. So I would be very okay to say that I only had an hypothesis. It was not backed with a lot of data. It was backed more with intuition, having spent those 2 decades in the supply chain space. It was more driven by intuition. So what was the trigger point? In order to execute a supply chain technology project, you need a team. I cannot do it alone. So this next hurdle that I had to cross, apart from the validation of hypothesis, or even before the validation of a hypothesis, I needed a minimally viable team which can go execute projects so that we can validate this hypothesis. I had the good luck, if I were to say, even as I was going through this thinking process, I had a group of people whom I had worked and I would meet regularly over coffee or over breakfast. That was a typical routine. A Saturday morning, I would meet, for example, my now co-founder at the time, an ex-colleague and a colleague, Alok Joshi. And we would brainstorm this idea between us. I had another one of my colleagues, Godwin, who was also into supply chain space. And he would also join us once in a while for those breakfast conversations. Between 3 of us, we started resonating a bit, taking this hypothesis. This hypothesis was resonating with between three of us. And that is when Alok said that I have a good friend of mine, Shwetank, who will add a lot of value to this team. And he came down flying one day. And we realized that four of us were resonating heavily. And at that particular point, I became very clear, or that clarity emerged, that I have the right team to now to proceed forward. And I had the right team, but we did not have any funding or any money on the table. So I had to ask each of them, will they be okay to quit their job and start working together
Right.
towards this concept of an organization? And I almost got an immediate yes. And all of them quit within next 6 months to start the organization.
Right.
So that was the trigger point. When I had the team, we were ready to jump.
So you were convinced, and your co-founder team was convinced. And then, how did it start off? What was your first project? Let's start with, what does SmartLinks do?
Okay. So if you were to look about supply chain, if you were to look at, as I had explained earlier, is a complex orchestrations of various functions like demand planning, supply planning, distribution planning, transportation planning, warehouse management. And if you want to do it at scale, you need technology. Imagine if I were to, again taking the car example, if I have to procure material, 30,000 parts or 3,000 sub-assemblies from 400 odd suppliers, and if I start doing it manually by making phone calls, imagine how many phone calls you have to make. And making sure they come on time.
Right.
Imagine all the enormous manual work that will go in.
Right.
So what you need is technology. So you have companies which have built some of these technologies, or what we call it as products, supply chain products, which caters to each of these individual functions. As SmartLinks, we implement these products for our customers. So for example, we will implement a collaboration software for supplier collaboration, or we will implement a sequencing software for production planning. So the next question that I can think of to simplify, what does implement mean?
Right.
Now the way these products are designed, the products that are created by the OEMs, the likes of Blue Yonder, are very flexible and they cater to a wide variety of industry. So what they have is a lot of configuration. There are certain configurations that are relevant to a certain industry, and there are certain other configurations which are relevant to another set of industries. So my team is responsible for making sure that those configurations are correct.
Right.
Apart from that, these softwares are data hungry softwares. So they need a lot of data which has to be sourced from their transactional systems, fed into these softwares, which actually have very powerful optimization engines, which run and churn out results.
Right.
The other aspect that comes, which makes this whole implementation complex, is fine-tuning this optimization engines to give you the right set of results.
Right.
Apart from that, right, the whole idea of training the customer to adopt solution, if you were to think of the 3 points that I had raised earlier, making sure that the customer knows the change management piece of it, making sure that the requirements or the configuration of product fits into the needs of the customer, which where the functional part understanding comes into picture, and finally making sure that the product works well with the customer.
Right.
So this is what implement broadly does.
So
An
basically,
implementation partner does.
If I get it right, it's about understanding the business needs of the clients,
Correct.
because they may change,
Yes.
and then ensuring that these supply chain products are fine-tuned in a way which actually caters to their business need.
Correct.
Right. Vinith, you also mentioned about those 3 points,
Mhm.
right? But before we get to that, I also want you to talk about your first success as a team because that
Correct.
excites me a lot.
Yes, yes. And it was, in fact, a validation of our hypothesis that I mentioned, right? The lack of an organization which exists and which can give value for the technological investment that is uh, made by a customer on these technologies. These are heavy technological investments. Now this is an interesting one. Um, we got our first lead um, from one of the existing OEMs, and and this was a very renowned auto manufacturer globally as well as in India, where they were looking at insourcing their inbound logistics planning function. And this logistics planning, there was a specialized company, again a very well-renowned specialized company which has been there for ages now and is very good at doing inbound logistics planning. They wanted to replace this particular organization, insource that function, and use technology to manage the function rather than using headcount and people to manage the function. So this was the objective that the OEM was looking forward to, and the leadership of this change was taken by an extremely well-renowned personality in the automotive supply chain space, Mr. Amlan Bose. So he took this as a challenge to use technology to solve his inbound logistics problem. And he then went looking for vendors who can help him implement the technology. He would do the process himself, but he needed vendors who can help him implement the technology. And Blue Yonder is one of the leaders in the supply chain space. So this particular request came to Blue Yonder. And at that time, we were already a partner to Blue Yonder. That was our starting point because I came from Blue Yonder. So there was a lot of relationship that was in place. And Blue Yonder was very keen to support us in that process. So they passed on this particular problem statement to us. And we went and presented our point of view and approach to solve this using technology.
Right.
Now, to make it more interesting, we were a bunch of, at that time, if I were to say, right, 5 people.
Right.
And 4 were co-founders, and we had also added our first team member, Mr. Amrik Tony. So you're talking about a transformation for a leading automotive company, and you're talking about a just started in its infancy, a company which is still figuring out things.
Right. It was your debut project.
It's a debut project. And the question is, why would an organization of that scale, of that reputation, will go with us?
Right.
We had literally no historical standing as an organization,
Right.
though we had understanding as a historical standing as individuals, but not as an organization. And we faced competition with some of the big
Established brands.
established players.
Right.
So it was almost, I would say, a David and a Goliath story. There was no way, or in our wildest dreams, we had not imagined that we will win that particular.
But what turned things in your favor?
It's coming back to the hypothesis.
Right.
Our ability to represent those 3 elements to drive a solution success and create the confidence in the customer that we will be able to successfully deliver was the key to the game.
Okay.
As I said, right, the the initial hypothesis was that organization were either good at products or either good at processes or good at change management. At the max, they would do two of them together well.
Right, right.
But we were able to articulate all the three.
So Smartlinks had hit a sweet spot, which resonated well with the clients.
Yes.
And I think it's a great learning for all the startups that as long as you have found your niche and there is a demand, you can still go ahead and beat some of the established brands.
And there are always such niche pointed white spaces where you can go and play. It's
Right.
only matter of applying yourself and
And-
articulating that particular space
And finding out that niche.
and finding out that niche. Correct.
Right. So, Vineet, one thing I remember you when we had our introduction done, and you talked about that about 70% of the projects actually fail, and it's only about 30% which actually succeeded back then when you started off.
Correct.
Right. Now, I want to understand in your tenure in Smartlinks so far, Smartlinks as a company, I think it has spent about 7 years in the industry.
Correct.
What has been your hit rate? How have you transformed that 70 failure, 30 success? What's the current stats?
So our hit rate has been 100%.
Wow.
So, and obviously, let me give you some insights into those numbers, right? We have been very deliberate when we have taken projects.
Right.
So there's a lot of deliberation that goes within the founding team before we kind of take up a project as well. And we have perfected that art of making it successful. So there are two ways to look at the 100% hit rate. And as an organization, we pride ourselves for that. But it has come at a cost as well. We had two choices. We could go down the path of quality and making sure that we solve every problem the right way, or we go down very fast and maybe compromise quality a bit. Then this hit rate would have been somewhere like a 60 to 70%. The team took a conscious choice that whatever we do, we will chase excellence, and that is one of our core values.
Right.
So it has come, we have got a 100% hit rate, but it has come at a cost of growth. But in the last 7 years, we have perfected the art of delivering successful projects, art and science of delivering successful projects. Now is the time we feel that we can scale to the next level. The growth question is something that we are looking at now.
Right. One thing, Vineet, going back to one of your previous answers, you talked about 3 key points, right?
Correct.
You talked about technology. You talked about change management, right? And you also talked about understanding the domain.
Correct.
So I understand the technology piece. I also understand the domain piece. But I want you to elaborate a little bit on change management. What is change management? Why it is one of those top 3 points? Because change management could be very different. Like when I think of change management, a lot of things come to my mind. In this scenario specifically, in this supply chain industry, what was change management all about? What do you have to deal with?
So let me take an example. So change management is actually more about people than technology. How do you make people adopt the technology? If people don't adopt the technology, then the investment will go down the drain. However smart solution you have put in, however intelligent solutions you have put in, right? So the people angle is very important. And why adoption does not happen? So I'll have to start from there, and then so an adoption does not happen. There are various reasons to it. So there is a group which is envisioning the technology investments. They may not be finally using those technologies. They are envisioning and they are actually in the process of buying. So there is a buyer group, which is a visionary group on the on the customer side, which is thinking of ways to improve operational efficiencies. And then there is a user group, which will actually be using the software. So sometimes there is a huge disconnect between these groups.
Mhm.
The buyer group is strongly entrenched in strategy and vision,
Mhm.
whereas the user group is strongly looking at operational and tactical aspects of it. And both are very important. So how do you match them together? So the starting, this gap causes a bit of a problem. Now let me explain this in a little bit more technical way, or make it more grounded. Now I can create a great software, a great optimization software, or use one of the great optimization software, and my user is already using an Excel sheet, and I have to move him from this Excel sheet to a software. So as I said initially as well, most of these softwares are data hungry. They need data maintenance. They need quality data.
Right.
If you put in garbage, it's garbage out. Now my user is sitting on an Excel sheet, and then there is a data issue on the Excel sheet. He can quickly correct it and then move on with his operations. Though next time he will again face that data issue because he has not figured out a systemic process of correcting that data.
Right.
Now, when you give him the software, you're also putting in systems in place or putting onus on the user on data maintenance, which will help him in the long run, but in the short run, it will add to his additional workload.
Mhm.
So the people are looking, operational users would be looking at the short run. That is when maximum rejection of software happens. So the challenge he will face there is, okay, you have given him an additional burden.
Right.
He's not seeing the benefit of taking on that additional burden, keeping the future in mind.
Right.
So that is where the conversion happens. How do you make that burden feel like less burden or support him during that process?
Right.
So maybe there are ways and mechanisms to clean data or to support the user better during that stabilization phase. So that is when we refer to change management, is being aware of. So sometimes users are not even aware of that this will come. So if you make them aware of, okay, there is a temporary pain associated with a long-term gain, then they are more open.
Right.
So that is where you are breaking resistance from then.
Right.
And then it's a question of how do you support them in the journey
Okay.
till the first fruits of those planning is realized.
Right. One thing which also comes to my mind is, Vineet, it has been about 7 years since the organization has been into existence, right? In these 7 years, you have traveled the distance right from a 5-member startup to now a leading APAC supply chain solutions and technology organization, right?
Correct.
And I'm sure these 7 years would have had its own challenges, right? You would have had some good days and you would have had some very challenging days. I want you to talk about some of the key challenges faced in these 7 years, at least top 2 to 3, and how did you, as a founding team or yourself, you managed it?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of challenges. And challenges make it interesting as well, the journey as well, interesting. So we got our early break quite early in the game. So we got a big logo. And even the second and third were pretty fast, given the expertise the founding team brought onto the table. But we were still a bunch of 5 guys, highly experienced guys who were working together. We were not an organization, let me put it. First 2 to 3 years were mostly on figuring out hypothesis and figuring out ways to deliver and perfecting the art and science. As we were doing that and we were ready to become an organization or start thinking about becoming an organization, it's when COVID hit.
Oh,
So and the first 6 months, we were clueless. How do we adopt to the new norm?
right.
Initially, we were traveling left, right, and center. We were meeting customers, we were selling, we were delivering, we were doing change management, all the three things. We were used to operating in a very high touch way,
Mhm.
which was meeting in person.
And I think that was one of the USPs of the organization as well.
Yes, yes. And now you're saying that do all those three things sitting in front of a computer over Teams. So
Right.
the biggest equation or the biggest part of the equation that we struggled in the initial 6 months, how do you sell over
Remotely.
remotely? And we were clueless, as I said, right? So 6 months of lean phase at that point in time can kill an organization.
Yeah, I have heard about many organizations who perished in that time
That's
frame.
correct. So, but I am lucky to have a founding team which is extremely resilient and it's very good at figuring out new ways of working. So, if this way stops, the team is very quickly can devise ways to work around. And towards the end of 6 months, we were able to land a very large deal. And it is considered to be one of the largest deals in the history of the software OEM. And this is for one of the largest provider of cloud services. And then we realized that, okay, 6 months, we can work it through. But we lost crucial 6 months to an year, I would say, during the COVID time. And what happened is that the ramp up that we were planning did not happen. Post 6 months, supply chain suddenly became a hot topic. And there was an uptick take in the market of supply chain solutions and services.
Right.
Now, we had not grown, but we had a lot of demand. So we were not able to capitalize on the demand itself.
So as the economies opened up, so the demand levels increased.
Not even before even when the economy did not open up, 6 months into COVID,
Right.
the demand for supply chain services became, we saw a great jump
Right.
because COVID disrupted the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone started realizing the need for supply chain investments.
Uh-huh.
So prior to that, we had planned for a ramp up. We could not execute that ramp up. Now we had a demand which has grown much more than what we had anticipated, but we did not have people to execute.
Right.
So it was going to a demand. Starting from a demand problem, it became a supply problem for us.
Okay. In a short time, the situation flipped.
Flipped.
Right.
So
Vinith, one thing I really wanted to ask, and this is to understand the psyche of the business.
mhm,
So COVID was a black swan event in some
Correct.
sense, right?
correct.
And you talked about the change wherein organizations started realizing that they need supply chain
Correct.
more than at any other time.
Mhm.
What triggered that realization? What was there, and can you simplify that?
Yes. So during COVID times, what happened? Zones will go into lockdown across the globe.
Right.
So at one point of time, Shanghai port would go into a lockdown.
Right.
but you had to still keep the essential goods and commodities moving. So you had to reroute your material from a different port. So imagine COVID as switching on and switching off of various ports,
Right.
one way of looking at it. Now, if you're trying to do it manually, it's not feasible. How do I understand which are my port options? Can I send it to Shenzhen? Should I airlift it? You have to evaluate multiple scenarios with a lot of speed.
Right.
It's not like that you have a clarity that next month you will have this port open.
Right.
Speed and agility of that planning was needed was much faster.
Right.
Doing that manually was not possible.
Right.
So what you needed was technology to support that process. So that was the realization.
So all that orchestration between functions was no way possible doing it manually.
Correct.
At that scale and at that speed, you had to have technology in place.
Correct.
The next thing which we will jump on is scaling the organization. Because most of the startups generally, like when you started off, and find it very difficult to actually build an organization and scale it, right? I just wanted to understand what your learnings have been, and as Smartlings, what have you guys done differently?
Yeah. So the journey has been, the whole journey itself has been an eye opener for me. I have worked in large organizations for a very long time, where one has already put structures in place, and this is where you are trying to build those structures. So those are very different ball games. Running within a set framework and structure, and then building that framework and structure. So as I said, right, we were initially a 5-6 member team, slowly growing up, adding people, and it was mostly a need and skill based addition of people, growing to a 14-15 member team. Still, it was not an organization. Everyone was doing their own job. And I had no clue how to build an organization from scratch. I have led teams in the past.
Yeah, I mean that's a very honest submission.
Yeah. So when we have no clue, or when I had no clue, I reached out to people. And one of the person who helped me out was my former boss, Mr. Hira Ganjikota. So with him, I got an idea of how to build an organization or lay initial foundations of the organization.
Right.
So what it meant. So initially, I was looking at mission, vision, values, and culture as certain punchlines or marketing statement, which is not the case. And this is a realization that happened 3-4 years into Smartlings. And as a group, right, it happened a little bit more later. Now, so we got, okay, we had to land a vision statement, we had to land a mission statement, and we had to land a core value statement. So I was very clear with this. So what we did, we started looking at companies and started copying those statements from there and trying to build our core values based on it. Looks right. So that process was itself non-convincing. It did not come out well.
Right.
That is when Hira kind of helped us. And that was a very interesting process and an eye-opening process. So then initially we said it is not working out. Setting up the vision, mission, and the value statement. So we took help. So first we anchored our vision, and that was multiple sessions, multiple rounds of discussions within the founding team, orchestrated by Hira. And we realized our vision is to make customer realize their supply chain technology investments.
Right.
Finally, it came down to the initial hypothesis, which is the 70-30. And that became our vision. It was a lot easier to land the mission statement. And part of that mission statement we were able to accomplish when we were awarded the Blue Yonder Partner of the Year award. And we have, in this 7 years of existence, we have been awarded twice.
Right.
And we are competing with certain very big established players, very well-known established players. So then we landed the mission statement. We wanted to be the best supply chain solution provider, and what that best would mean in terms of revenue, in terms of recognition.
Right.
That was landed. The third piece of the equation was the values piece, the core values. So, and this was a very interesting process. The first two was something that was fast, but the third one was complicated. So what we decided then was, and this was very well orchestrated by Hira. So we collected all our stories of last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we started analyzing what was that key human behavior that resulted in success of that project.
Amazing.
So when we say customer centricity, what does that mean? Otherwise, initially it was a punchline.
Right.
So does it mean that we are ready to go to any extent to get the customer the outcome that he or she is looking for, or guide him in the right direction? So people started coming with stories. Each story was then labeled with, I would say, a draft value, what they felt about it. Then this set of draft values were debated internally. This looks right. Multiple draft values were converted into, say, one value.
Right.
And that is when the whole value came out as formally published value. And then everyone resonated with that value.
Right.
Now in our meetings, I can be questioned on the core value of the organization. So I am being kept honest. And this is the most junior member of the team can put a core value of the organization at the forefront and literally override the CEO of the organization. So that is what we have built over last.
Wow. Now, what I understand is it's a great process because any person who's trying to build his own organization can probably learn from this.
Correct.
The other thing is every person in the organization now relates to those values because they have shared their stories, and those values have been eventually derived from those stories.
Correct.
So eventually the onus is on everyone also to actually go ahead and adhere and abide by those.
Correct.
So
this is their values.
This is their values.
Yes.
It's not something which has been shared or taken from any other organization and imposed on them.
Correct.
So that this makes a very intrinsic way of coming up with the values which actually works for everyone.
Correct.
I think this is a really great learning for us, and I think some of the other organizations who are in that build-up mode can actually learn from this.
Correct. And to reinforce further, we had value stories, value champions, and if you go in and look at SmartLink's LinkedIn, right, we have celebrated if someone has performed well to the measures of those core values, we have celebrated them as core value champions.
Right.
So that further reinforced.
That further reinforces. Wow, amazing. So once so I understand the scaling piece, right? So once the organization has been scaled up, what next?
Yeah, so we are still in the journey of scaling. So if we were to look at the phases of the organization, the phase one was more validating the hypothesis. Second phase was more building the organization when I talked about mission, vision, and core values. The third phase is what I consider as we are ready for scaling now. Now, this is where this is version 3 of SmartLinks, right? Now scaling this is a new game, and let me be candid. I will be doing it for the first time. But I'm wiser because of phase 1 and phase 2. So we were crawling, now walking, now we want to run. And growth is becoming a priority. So how do we scale? Now, one way of scaling is to throw people at the problem. And there's nothing wrong in that. But as SmartLinks, we are thinking a little bit differently. And AI is going to be the centerpiece of this.
Right.
Specifically, generative AI. And let me illustrate with an example. Over the last 7 years, what we have done is we have collected so much of knowledge within the organization. So if someone new joins us, they need not invent things from scratch. They may need to go to a certain person X, and the person can give him, okay, this problem has been solved in such scenario. These are the set of slides. These are the data templates. This is the algorithm to solve it. So that exists as of now. We have even gone to the extent of if I were to look at a business and say where the problems will lie, what is a structured way of doing value discovery and even value articulation, both. This knowledge is within the organization, with people, in form of PDF documents, PowerPoint documents, and various Excel sheets. Now imagine all this is fed into a large language model. And instead of asking a person, the new person who is joining asks this large language model. I'm going to a customer meeting. The customer is an automotive customer. Can you give me a presentation or a list of points that can be potentially a pain points for them? Can you do some R&D for me? Mm-hmm. And the large language model, based on my understanding of technology, can churn out that answer. So what I'm talking about as SmartLinks, if I build a consulting co-pilot, I increase the productivity of a consultant from X to 1.5x or a 2x.
So basically you're talking here about reducing the ramp up time for a new consultant who has just joined in.
That is one way of looking at it. Even if I'm preparing for something, if I can reduce ramp up reduce the preparation time, and so you're bang on, right? I will reduce the ramp up time, but that's a one time reduction. But let's look at other functions as well. I have to write a SQL script, PL SQL script, which looks at multiple sources of data. One of the jobs that we do, right, is connect disparate data sources and put it in a planning engine for them to plan. So what it means is that you're writing a lot of SQL scripts, or you're doing a lot of data manipulation. Now, in a large language model, you have to focus on articulation of that problem and prompting that, and it can finally give you a SQL script.
Right.
So a SQL script which would take a day to write, day and a half, can be done in 2 hours. So there is a productivity gain that is happening, which is resulting in us doing more with same amount of people. Yeah. So that is one lever.
And you don't have to do back and forth with the technical team also if
Correct.
there are questions,
so that collaboration
effort is minimized.
So what you need to train your teams on is how do you prompt and get the right responses from the large language model.
Right.
So team is working on codifying the knowledge base so that it can be served with lot much ease to everyone across the organization.
Right.
And I see generative AI as one of the key things that can help us build that consulting copilot,
Right.
which our consultants can internally use.
Right. So what I get from this is, Vineet, one, you are trying to reduce the training time, the ramp up time, and also the research and the some of these key presentations and pitching which you do.
Correct.
Right. So that reduces a lot of time, and then the back and forth and the every overhead which is involved with that.
Correct.
So that is looking inwards in the organization. How AI is also are there use cases where AI is helping supply chain or in future will help when you look outwards in your engagement with the clients?
Correct. And there are two ways it will help. So once we have the consulting copilot in place, time to value for the customer will reduce. So they don't have to. So time and cost go together. They are correlated. So we can deliver the same projects faster because I can do things faster, which is of very direct value to our customers. But let me make it more intrinsic to the customer. Now, and if you look at generative AI as such, you can organize information very well using generative AI. You can give it a set of disorganized text, and it can give you steps of processes. So that is what I called organization of information. Now imagine the life of a supply chain planner, a supply planner. If I can model that skill set in a generative AI, theoretically, and this is something we are experimenting with, we can create a planning copilot for our customers. And it will support the change management or make the change management a lot easier. So what the customer can do is that even in the supply chain process, he or she may have 70 to 80% of repetitive tasks. So they can actually feed the text of that information into a generative AI model. And even some of the non-repetitive tasks, and create an agent out of it, which can do those repetitive tasks for them.
Right.
And they can focus on the task which are less repetitive. So you make them less operational. So you're creating an extension of a planner.
Right.
Which is a planning co-pilot who is sitting, and you have handed over.
I remember that you made a very interesting statement when we had met for discussing about this podcast, which was basically saying that pre-AI era, humans with the help of machine would plan and deliver.
Correct.
And post-AI era, machines with the help of humans would plan and deliver.
Correct.
So that's it's a paradigm shift in the way.
So initially human was in the loop.
Right.
Now human is out of the loop.
Right. So yeah, initially yes. So so the core responsibility lied with the human.
Yeah.
There was a software support or a machine support to it.
Correct.
But now we have the core responsibility lying with the machine.
Correct.
And there could be a human intervention or a support to it.
Responsibility may still lie with the human. There is no way to make a machine responsible. But yeah, the steady state will be handled by the machine.
Right.
It is only when machine needs help they will call humans.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Next thing which really comes to my mind is supply chain as a career. Let's talk about that. We have had various career fields and industries which has actually seen a downturn with the advent of AI, right? And more the adoption is increasing, at least from a career perspective. the demand for the new recruits are also decreasing. In some of the industries, we have seen that. How do you see supply chain going ahead with it?
Supply chain has a shortage of talent. It's
Right.
it's it has a different problem. Um, there is need of more people.
It's an amazing thing which you are saying here because it's going to kindle hope in a lot of people who are actually quite disappointed or with the fact that recruitments are going down. And this is an amazing news.
Yeah, and as Smartlinks, we are hiring as well, right?
Yeah.
Let me put that way. We expect amazing growth this year. Now, the problem is not of roles being not available, and it's a more of a problem of the skill set being not available,
Right.
or that skill set being not considered in a way from a curriculum or a training perspective. So supply chain is, so there's no thing, as you have started, Vivek, right? Everything that you see around you, there is a supply chain enabling that. Every product that you see, and all of the products around us are complex assemblies. Uh, so the way to look at supply chain as a career is to also look at your interests as well. So there has to be an interest and a passion. Though we have demand, we find difficult to get people. And what is the reason for that? The right people is always a challenge. So if someone is looking to pursue a career in supply chain, what are the key ingredients or what are the key things that should excite them to make them ready for a supply chain role? Couple of that I have in mind, the top 3 that comes to my mind.
Right.
Number 1 is interest in people. I am starting with not the technology piece, because when you're talking about supply chain, you have to deal with a lot of people, lot of
Right.
stakeholders.
Right.
So you should be ready to listen to them, and listening is a hard skill as well. The second part is you should be able to absorb all that information and then articulate that information back in an organized fashion,
Mhm.
and also understand from those conversations where are the value buckets
Mhm.
which you can go ahead and figure out.
Mhm.
So the first part is the people part of it. The second part is supply chain is all about data. So your comfort with data has to be high. It's the math that will matter out here. And the third part is technology. Though initially when I started the organization, my view was just opposite. I started with technology, went to data, and then went to people. And that view has reversed fully. So the technology is that ability to learn new technology, new products, and understand them. And then again, going back to the first is articulate and explain them to the people back.
Right.
So these are the 3 ingredients I would say will make a successful supply chain consultant. And even if you have 2 of them, you are already will be much in demand in the market.
Awesome. We discussed about your founding team and how you started off meeting in the coffee shops and breakfast, and then the whole brainstorming sessions happened. Can you talk about a little bit about each one of your founding members and their background, just to understand that um, what is the company's founding member in general, the team's background?
Yeah. And I have an amazing founding team.
Right.
I have been lucky that way.
Right.
So the organization was formed in those coffee shop discussions if I were to say. And if I were to say, in those idli vada shops, yeah, that was our best hanging place where we would sit together for for breakfast early in the morning.
Yeah, I have to say this because all the CEOs and VPs that I have done podcast with, everyone has mentioned about Sangeeta and the Idli Vada shop.
And
This
Udupi in my case.
in your case, so I don't know what's the connect there. I think whoever is starting off should definitely meet up there.
Yes. So it's near our house. So the logistics is a lot easier. So me and Alok would have brainstormed this idea over many such meetings. And Alok, I'm not an MBA, but Alok is an MBA from one of the premier institutes. And Alok has a unique skill of ingesting a lot of information, organizing, and replaying that with added value. And in my 2 decades of career, I had not seen someone being able to do that to that level of perfection. So, and by the way, he has also spent almost near about 2 decades in the supply chain space. So his core capability, if I were to say, he has many capabilities, but the core capability was his ability to articulate value. And why me and Alok went along very well, we had a shared value system in terms of how we wanted to build the organization. And this is, I'm saying in retrospect. At that time, it felt like we are resonating together. Now, Godwin was someone whom I had hired in my previous organization.
Mm-hmm.
And Godwin comes from analytics background. He has crunched in volumes of data to get supply chain insights. And his ability to be with ease with data was amazing. So imagine I have a guy who can churn out data and insights from the data so effortlessly. And Alok who can represent that data and articulate value out of that data so well. We already had a winning team in place. But the cherry on this whole cake was Shwetank. Shwetank, when I first met him, he was a shy guy, in a very traditional, coming from a very traditional large organization. So I'm pretty sure he was skeptical. And Shwetank was Alok's friend, and Alok was always very bullish on Shwetank. We need this guy as a part of our founding team. And this guy can do wonders to the organization. And that has been the case. Shwetank leads the maximum part of the team, if I were to look at it. Shwetank's ability to learn and model a business problem in an algorithm or a product was way up the roof. The first deal that we sold together, he had no clue about the specific function that we were selling on. But he could read through, he could work on the product and created a working model. So he was the nerd in the process. And he still surprises me. Because last week we faced a similar situation. Mm-hmm. And whenever I have something new, he's the go-to guy. So imagine I have someone who can take a look at the problem which we have never taken a look at and solve that. A person who can crunch a humongous amount of data a person who can represent that data and talk in front of the customer. Now, this was sufficient for us to sell way beyond our capability to execute. We were very careful in our sales process as well to make sure that we execute. Now, as this team got formed, there was need of more team members. And there was a specific need. There was sometimes we had to go into certain areas of development which needed a hardcore development expertise. This team did not come with development expertise. That is where our head of engineering, which is Rishabh, comes into picture. He's that guy. So if Shwetank can articulate a problem and give math to Rishabh, or Godwin can give math to Rishabh, he can code it and create a solution or a product out of it. What makes Rishabh extremely unique is not only his development skill, but his ability to orchestrate an ecosystem to do that for him. So because you can do only this much. Now, as we were growing, the need for compliance, the need for making sure all the returns are filed on time. So if I were to look at the amount of compliance that we have to undertake is
Very
humongous.
critical aspect of
Humongous. We have to file a returns with employment exchange. We have to file a returns with STPI. We have to file, apart from the GST returns, the income tax returns, the labor laws returns, the company laws, and the list goes on. There are various notifications that comes into play. And that is when Baiju Alex, who was part of Blue Yonder as a finance manager, joined the organization. And he set the backbone of compliance in the organization. So the way he designed and the way he maintained the books, and the books were maintained so rigorously that even when we were opened for scrutiny at times, there was no correction that needed to be done.
Right.
His rigor and his obsession with that accuracy has helped the organization from a compliance way. So if you look at these two gentlemen, Rishabh, who landed the engineering piece, and Baiju, who landed the compliance piece, without that, we would not be able to scale the organization. But the next, if I were to go ahead and add one more person to the organization who is part of who is now is part of the management team of the organization or the board of directors, is Amrik. And Amrik came from an extremely different background. He came to us after trying his stint as being a stand-up comedian.
Wow. Wow.
So he came to us looking for a job. I don't think his initial intent was to be part of supply chain.
Right.
And under Shwetank, he leads the majority of the team. He reports into Shwetank. But he encapsulates the best of all. So he's good with data. His ability to code is phenomenal. His ability to face the customer, understand, articulate, and give value back is phenomenal.
Right.
So he represents the evolution of smart links, and his ability to deal with people is phenomenal, which is a mixture of all the founding teams put together.
So basically, you have got your Avengers who all have different superpowers, and they complement each other very well.
Correct.
Right? I think that's the right ingredient also for any organization to start off, and probably for our listeners also, it's a great thing to understand that what does it take to succeed. Like from a founding member point of view, who are your key players and what kind of qualities they need to have. So from that perspective, it's a great insight into your team, and that's why I asked that question, so that we can understand what does it take to succeed. So these people also played a very important and key role in your organization's success eventually. I think if one of them would have been missing, it would have been a difficult climb.
Correct, correct. Just building on that, right? We have got the core ingredients in place, and Hira, who was helping us, who has been associated with the organization, has now joined us full time, and he has joined very recently. So, what I am excited about for Smartlinks is the trajectory of growth that we are looking at. Um, and we have an amazing delivery team.
It was a great podcast, Vineet. We got to understand the nuances of supply chain. We got to understand more about you and about Smartlinks. Um, we had an amazing time discussing what are the key intricacies and the key challenges which generally an upcoming organization faces, and how Smartlinks manage that. Um, Now we also understand what does the supply chain future look
Not
like to a
so
certain extent, and how
good
AI is going to support it,
fact about
both
some of
inward
these
looking
technology
and outward looking.
investments. Supply chain has a shortage of
And
talent.
most importantly, we also got to know
hit rate has
that
been
supply
100%.
chain is an industry
Amazing
which is
growth
looking out for
this
people
year.
and right people there. Thank you for coming here, and it was great having you.
Thanks, Vivek, for having me part of your show.
Thank you.